Lupita Mañana, Chapter 5. After Salvador left to go around the corner to take up his post, Lupita walked down the alley till she stood across from the charro shop. She recognized its rear entrance by the name painted above the door. In back of her was a deep-set doorway not in use. Boards in the shape of the letter X had been nailed across the door. There was space under the X for her to crawl in and sit down with her back to the door and her knees drawn up to her chest. Sticking her head out above the center of the boards, she could see anyone in the alley. She hoped Salvador had found as good a hiding place on the calle Tercero. Hours went by, but Lupita scarcely moved. Her hips ached from her cramped posture. She had just tilted the water bottle to her mouth when she saw a truck, a new-looking black pickup, come around the corner. It screeched to a halt in back of Senor Diaz's shop. A young, long-haired Mexican wearing a red scarf headband and a yellow vest got out. With the car keys jingling in his hand, he went into the shop. A moment later, he was back in the alley and Tomas was with him. Under her breath, Lupita hissed, "Gordo, fat one." Tomas was angry with the young man. She could tell by the expression on his face and the movements of his hands that he was giving him a tongue-lashing. Then, Tomas and the youth walked around the truck to the front and halted there. The older man pointed, stabbing a finger at the left front fender. Lupita saw the cause of his anger now. The fender was dented and crumpled. The young man had been driving the truck and had had an accident with it. He had told Tomas about it, and Senor Tomas was very angry. This automobile must belong to him, then. Why else would he become so angry? What would happen next? Would he strike the young man? No. Tomas stuck out his hand, palm upward, and the young man dropped the car keys into it. Tomas put them in his pocket and, glaring at the young man, jabbed his thumb toward the rear door of the shop. Then both of them went inside. For a time, Lupita waited. Then she crawled out of the doorway and ran down the alley to the street. She found Salvador sitting on the edge of the high curb talking with a younger boy. When he saw her, he got up and said, "Adios," to the boy, and came to her. Lupita said softly, "Salvador, Fat Tomas has a truck in the alley behind the shop. I know it is his. He has the keys to it." "See," Salvador nodded. "I saw that truck go by not long ago. It is a new black one. Is anybody in the alley now?" "No." "Bueno. Let's go see that fat coyote's car." As they started to walk, Lupita turned and asked, "Coyote?" "That is the name for men who take people over the border. The boy told me. This Tomas. He is the fattest coyote in Tijuana." "Has the boy been over there himself?" "Not yet, but he hopes to go. He does not have enough money to pay a coyote either. Each year they ask for more money." Before Lupita and Salvador entered the alley, they looked carefully up and down to make sure that no one else was there. When they were satisfied, they went as far down the block as the black pickup truck. Salvador stepped silently up onto the running board and peered over the side. Lupita watched him anxiously. Suddenly, she saw him reach over into the back, and then she heard a series of popping sounds. What was Salvador doing? "Lupita!" he hissed, and he gestured for her to give him the sack of food. Taking it from her, he leaned over and put it inside. Then he held out his right hand. She took hold of it, jumped onto the narrow running board, and looked down into the back of the truck. Now she understood what the popping sounds were. Over the bed of the truck was a protective canvas cover that was closed by grip fasteners. Salvador had opened several on the left side. "Get in," he told her, taking her by the hips and pushing her upward over the left rear fender. "Get in the fat coyote's truck?" She gave her brother a beseeching look, but he only pushed harder. Obediently, Lupita climbed up over the fender and lay down on the metal bed of the truck. A minute later, Salvador lay next to her. He reached up and snapped the fasteners shut once more. He said grimly, "From now on, we go where the coyote goes." Lupita looked around her and saw nothing but a spare tire and some tools. "What shall we do in here?" she asked. "Wait. Wait and keep quiet." "See. Are you hungry, Salvador?" At his nod, She gave him the water, opened the cracker box, and scooped out some beans for both of them. "You did well to come tell me about the truck." "Gracias, Salvador." His words of praise warmed her. Through eating, Lupita put the precious food back into the sack. She lay on the hard, hot metal with Salvador and looked up at the queer canvas. Though they could breathe, they soon found themselves panting from the heat of the afternoon sun beating down on the canvas above them. It was dusk by the time Lupita heard the rear door of the shop open. She heard Tomas speak. "Adios, Diaz. See that Tanto son of mine doesn't give you any trouble in your shop. Tell him to go home in time for his supper. Let him walk. I'll be home by 10 o'clock. Call my wife and tell her, por favor." "Sí, adios, Tomas." Lupita felt the balance of the truck shift as the gordo got inside. Then the engine started and the pickup began to move. Lupita whispered, "This coyote did not look to see what might be in his truck. The Virgin be praised." "Why should he?" "He look under the cover." Salvador laughed, a hollow, soft laugh. "Hang on now so you don't get hurt, Lupita." What a bumping, bruising ride there was for the two of them as Tomas drove toward his unknown destination. As he twisted and turned the car through Tijuana, Lupita could hear noise, and she could even see dim colors of traffic lights overhead through the canvas. Then came darkness and silence except for the sound of the truck's motor. It seemed to Lupita that they were climbing. She had no idea how far they had traveled or where they were when Tomas brought the truck to a halt. He turned off the engine and got out, shutting the door softly. Lupita held her breath. What was going to happen now? At first, there was the sound of the wind only. Then, Lupita heard soft voices speaking Spanish. There were men's voices and women's too. Over them rose the voice of Tomas. "All is ready. I know a path through these hills. Follow me." "Don't we ride over in your truck?" asked an old man's voice. "No, there is no road for a truck. We must walk, and you must follow me closely. Do not light sight of me until I turn you over to the gringos. They will take you to a place they know." Salvador crawled over to the side of the truck bed and opened the snap fasteners. Lupita sucked in her breath. Would the coyote hear? No, Salvador managed all very cunningly. "Lupita," he whispered, "wait till they all leave with him. Then we'll follow." Crouched, Lupita waited while Salvador watched the Mexicans leave with Tomas. At his signal, she followed him over the side of the truck to the ground. "Come on," he called softly. "I see them. Hurry, hurry!" With only a glance upward at the star-spangled sky and the trees twisting in the wind, Lupita ran after her brother. She, too, could see the black shapes of the half-dozen people ahead of them. For a time, the path they followed climbed. Then it reached the crest of a hill and began to descend. Descend to where? Had they crossed the border into the United States? There was no fence to be seen. Didn't that tall fence at the border checkpoint run along the entire bottom of the United States? Had they gone through a wide gap someone had cut in it, a hole so big she could not see it? Could they still be in Mexico? Lupita was still wondering where she was when she heard a very loud whirring sound. It froze her to the spot. The sound came from directly overhead. As she glanced to see what it was, an enormous shaft of brilliant white light stabbed her in the eyes. Red lights glittered in the sky, too. She had seen the thing above them in Ensenada once. It was a helicopter, hovering, shining its searchlight down on them. It must be the police, the Guardia, but up in the sky. "Lupita, come on!" Salvador shouted. She looked up and saw him in the white light. For the first time, she could make out the others in the coyote's party. Including Tomas, there were 8 of them. All were hurrying, stumbling forward down the hill as fast as they could. Suddenly, some men leaped out to meet the Mexicans, and the two groups merged. One of the women screamed as a man caught hold of her and held her by her long hair. 2 other men flung an old man to the ground and began to punch him with their fists. Everyone was yelling and shrieking. "Salvador! Salvador!" cried Lupita, still running forward. Then she saw that her brother was no longer running. He was struggling with a big, fair-haired gringo. Salvador was in trouble. Sprinting toward him, Lupita reached into her sock and took out the water bottle. When she reached the 2 of them, Lupita hit the gringo on the side of the head with the bottle as hard as she could. The bottle smashed, and as it did, Salvador's attacker fell to the dry, stone-covered ground. "Help me! Help me!" The shrill wail of a girl rose above all the other noises. Lupita stood transfixed, but Salvador jumped over the fallen gringo and ran to the young woman's side. He hurled himself at the man who had thrown her down. Brave Salvador! The force of his rush sent the gringo sprawling and shouting and cursing in English. He rolled down the steep hillside. Salvador grabbed the girl's outstretched hand and jerked her to her feet. As the young woman got up, shrieking in terror, Lupita saw Tomas come back up the hill, pumping his arms to run faster. He lumbered past her and dove into some tall shrubbery. He had deserted his people, leaving them in the mercy of those lurking gringo bandits. Salvador and the young woman clustered together with the rest of Tomas's party, all save the old man, who lay on the hillside a distance away. 2 of the men and Salvador picked up rocks and waited for the 4 gringo robbers who walked toward them. Lupita ran to join the group. Terrified, they watched their attackers gather and stand staring at them out of greedy eyes. All at once, a spurt of dust sprang up not far from one of the gringos, followed by a whining sound. A rifle shot. It had come from the helicopter. The gringos sprang into action, leaping down the hill into the cover of trees at the bottom. Lupita covered her face with her hands. Would the men in the helicopter shoot the rest of them now? "No corres! Do not run!" a voice thundered from the sky. "Váyanse para atrás! Go back!" As they started toward the border, the white beam from the helicopter held them in its light. Lupita looked back at the old man on the ground. His gray hair was splattered with blood. One of the others bent over him and then shook his head. The old man was dead. "Ay de mí!" Lupita mourned for him as the young woman babbled to Salvador. "Gracias, gracias, thank you for what you did for me." As the gringo border patrol surrounded them and took the men into custody, the women began to sob uncontrollably. Afraid, Lupita wondered what would happen to her and Salvador. A flashlight shone on her face, and she froze. Stifling a wail, she watched as a patrolman took Salvador by the shoulder and led him over to a group of men bound for jail. But an instant later, another gringo asked Salvador his age. 15, senor. The man shoved him back toward the women. "What papers do you have?" a big patrolman asked. The women gave up the forged papers they had gotten from the Tomas, while Salvador and Lupita shook their heads dumbly. Suddenly, the gringo reached out and jerked off Lupita's baseball cap. Her long braids fell down and began to blow in the night wind. "Another girl, eh? 3 women and a boy. All right, we'll take you all back to the border and let you go." "Let them go? They will not go to jail then?" "Gracias, gracias, senores," Lupita burst out. "We don't put women and children in jail. But don't try to come over here again. Remember what happened to you this time. Be glad you are alive." As they walked away, escorted by the border patrolman, Lupita overheard an older woman complain. "Ay de mí, that fat coyote will not give my money back. He ran away and left us. He saved his fat hide, but my husband must go to jail. What shall I do now? I have no more money to pay another coyote." Lupita began to tremble. What would she and Salvador do? They had gotten over the border, but only for minutes, and those few minutes could easily have cost them their lives. How right Salvador had been when he said there could be robbers on both sides. As Lupita walked along, her footsteps guided by the flashlights of the officers on her left and right, Salvador whispered, "I was proud of you down there, Lupita." "I was proud of you, Salvador, but we must get a new bottle for our water." "See, we must find a way to cross over another time." "Another time?" Lupita let out a deep sigh. What difference did it make if all these people heard her? They knew she wasn't a boy. She glanced at her brother. Some day, when they returned to Ensenada, she would tell everyone what a very brave thing he had done tonight. Then, perhaps he would tell them what she, small, skinny Lupita, had done, too.